The battlefield was silent, but somewhere in the shadows, an order was being whispered that could have rewritten history, if anyone had dared to act. The winter of 1942 had already left Europe frozen, both in snow and in despair. Villages lay in ruin, fields scarred by artillery, and forests once green now stood blackened by relentless bombings. Yet amidst the horror, a single, almost invisible network of men and women moved like shadows, shaping events that the textbooks would never recount. They were spies, saboteurs, messengers, and ordinary soldiers thrust into extraordinary circumstances, human gears in a machine of death and strategy. Captain Elias Stern, a German-born Jew who had fled to London before the war, now served as a liaison for a covert Allied intelligence cell. His task was deceptively simple on paper: infiltrate enemy lines, gather intelligence, and ensure that critical messages reached the right hands. In practice, it was a daily gamble with death. Each message he carried could determine the fate of thousands, yet every night, he slept with a weapon beneath his pillow and a photograph of his younger brother in his pocket, a silent reminder of why failure was unthinkable. By December, rumors circulated of a secret Nazi plan, codenamed Operation Frostbite, that aimed to deploy experimental weapons on the Eastern Front. Details were murky, but Allied intelligence knew enough to panic. If the Nazis succeeded, entire cities could vanish overnight. Stern's orders were to intercept intelligence confirming the plan's existence. Failure was not an option; success could save countless lives. His journey began in the shattered outskirts of Warsaw. The streets smelled of smoke and decay, a permanent stench etched into the stone. Children scavenged among rubble, too young to understand the war but old enough to remember its cruelty. Stern crouched in shadow, watching German patrols move in predictable patterns, memorizing every footstep. One misstep would be fatal. A slight shift in uniform, a mispronounced word, and he would vanish without a trace. That night, a meeting was arranged in a ruined cathedral, its stained glass windows shattered, letting moonlight spill across broken pews. There, Stern met Lucien Martel, a French resistance fighter whose calm exterior masked nerves frayed by years of clandestine warfare. Together, they examined a coded message that had arrived by courier, a cryptic note indicating the location of the secret facility where Operation Frostbite was being orchestrated. "Do you think it's real?" Stern asked, voice barely above a whisper. Lucien shrugged, lighting a cigarette. The flame flickered across his face, revealing shadows of exhaustion. "If it's not, we'll know soon enough. But if it is, we're the only ones who can stop it." They planned meticulously, knowing each moment outside the safety of the resistance network increased their chances of capture, or worse. They would travel north, crossing minefields, rivers frozen solid, and villages where loyalty could be bought for a loaf of bread. Each step carried the weight of the lives depending on them. Stern thought about his brother, about the faces of families in London awaiting news from the front. The pressure coiled tightly in his chest, a constant reminder of the stakes. As dawn approached, they moved through the icy streets, blending with civilians and displaced refugees. The cold bit through their coats, but adrenaline kept their limbs moving. Stern's thoughts were a mixture of fear, focus, and grim determination. This was the first fact the war never taught: heroes are forged not in glory, but in the shadows of invisible battles where no one will ever know your name. By the time the first German patrols began their rounds, Stern and Lucien had vanished into the forests outside Warsaw, carrying with them not only a fragment of intelligence but also the fragile hope of altering history. And in that forest, where every tree could hide a gun barrel and every shadow could be a death sentence, they discovered something else entirely, an unanticipated piece of information that would become the first of the 7 shocking facts never taught in schools. The Nazi facility they were tracking did not merely house weapons. It was experimenting on human subjects, prisoners forced to endure extreme cold, chemical exposure, and psychological torment, testing survival thresholds in conditions far beyond anything officially documented. Stern's heart sank at the discovery. These weren't just soldiers or military experiments, these were men and women stripped of humanity for the sake of war. He knew immediately that the intelligence they carried could not remain hidden. The world had to know, even if it meant risking everything. And as they melted deeper into the forest, the first layer of a hidden war unfolded before them, a world where heroism, cruelty, and secrecy intertwined so tightly that the lines between morality and necessity blurred beyond recognition. Stern's breath came in ragged clouds, and the snow beneath his boots reflected the faint glimmer of dawn. In that moment, he understood the cruel truth of World War II: not all battles were fought on open fields. Some were waged in whispers, in codes, in the silent courage of those too small to be remembered by history. And it was here, in the frozen forests of Poland, that the first shocking truth of the war would be unearthed, a truth so chilling that textbooks, propaganda, and even post-war narratives would omit it entirely. The snow-covered forest stretched endlessly, gray and silent, except for the crunch of boots against frozen ground. Captain Elias Stern and Lucien Martel pressed on, the coded intelligence burning a weight in their packs. Each breath rose in icy plumes, mingling with the muted whispers of trees that had seen far too much death. Here, in the silence, every shadow seemed to move, every crack of frost-laden branch a potential threat. The second shocking fact of World War II revealed itself not in grand battles or heroic charges, but in the subtle manipulation of information. Stern had learned that the Nazis had embedded agents even within the so-called neutral territories, feeding false reports back to Allied command and creating phantom operations to mislead and terrify. Entire offensives had been altered, soldiers sent to die needlessly, while the enemy laughed in secrecy. And Stern now carried proof, a set of encoded orders that, if deciphered, could save thousands of lives, but also unravel centuries of assumed strategy. They emerged from the forest near a quiet village, one of the many ghost towns left behind after the German advance. The streets were littered with abandoned belongings, half-burned letters, and toys frozen in place. Stern's eyes fell on a small wooden cart tipped over near a shuttered house. Inside lay a bundle of children's clothes and a single doll, its face cracked. He knelt briefly, brushing snow off the doll, feeling the weight of humanity amidst the machinery of war. Lucien glanced at him, sensing the shift. "We can't linger," he said. "Every minute here increases the odds that someone has already seen us." The village was deceptively calm. At a distance, German patrols moved methodically, oblivious to the two shadows slipping along the edges of rooftops and behind rubble. Stern's fingers itched for the pistol strapped under his coat, but he knew discretion would serve him better than confrontation. Survival now depended on intelligence, cunning, and patience. They reached the outskirts and entered a concealed bunker, half buried under a heap of snow and fallen timbers. Here, other members of their Allied intelligence cell were waiting: Dr. Katarina Weiss, a linguist and cryptographer, and Sergeant Tomasz Nowak, a mechanic-turned-saboteur whose skills with explosives were unmatched in the region. Together, the team pored over Stern's documents, the candlelight flickering across maps and coded messages. "The Nazis are testing not just weapons, but entire psychological operations," Katarina said, her fingers tracing patterns on a document. "They've trained troops to respond to fake intelligence and staged retreats. Their goal isn't just domination, it's to make their enemies question reality, to undermine trust at every level." Stern's stomach tightened. Another shocking truth, buried under layers of wartime propaganda: the war wasn't just fought with guns and bombs, but with deception, manipulation, and fear. This was a battle that few would ever see documented, a war within a war fought invisibly, where human minds were the primary targets. That night, Stern and Lucien were assigned a high-risk task: infiltrate an enemy supply train carrying experimental munitions and gather first-hand evidence of the operations revealed in the documents. The train traveled under heavy escort, yet the routes were mapped, schedules known, and every detail accounted for by intelligence intercepts. Timing would be critical. A delay of even a few minutes could mean capture or death. As they moved toward the railway lines, the winter sky was bruised with early morning light, casting long shadows across frozen fields. The wind carried with it the distant sounds of artillery, muffled but persistent, a reminder that even while they navigated secrecy, the world was burning elsewhere. They crouched in ditches, counting guards, memorizing shifts, and planning the precise moment to strike. Lucien whispered, "This is the kind of operation where history doesn't remember the people who actually make it happen." They'll talk about battles and generals, but not us. Stern nodded. He understood. History often celebrated the visible acts of war, the armies, the invasions, the surrender ceremonies. Yet behind every headline, countless lives had been risked in silence, in shadows, for truths that might never be acknowledged. This realization steeled him. Heroism was not in medals, but in moments when no one watched. At dusk, they executed the infiltration. Stern and Tomasz approached the train under the cover of darkness, shadows slipping between snowdrifts and broken tracks. Katerina provided remote coordination via a primitive radio transmitter, her voice calm but urgent. Every second felt like an eternity as Stern pried open a cargo hatch and glimpsed the contents, crates marked with unfamiliar symbols, documents detailing human experimentation, and chemical compounds that should have never existed. The evidence was staggering. They photographed and cataloged everything, knowing that the proof could change the course of the war. But then, the sound of boots echoed closer. A German patrol, rounding the bend earlier than anticipated. Stern froze, pulse hammering, adrenaline flooding every nerve. Lucian silently motioned toward the ditch, and they melted into the shadows, holding their breath as the patrol passed mere meters away. Once the danger had passed, Stern exhaled slowly. He knew this was only the beginning. They had uncovered a second shocking truth: the war had layers of secrecy, deception, and hidden atrocities that had been meticulously erased from public knowledge. The evidence they now carried was a double-edged sword. It could save lives but also make them targets for the most ruthless minds of the Third Reich. As they returned to the safety of the bunker, Stern realized that every step deeper into enemy territory revealed more than weapons or orders. It revealed the human cost, the moral complexity, and the sheer audacity of the hidden struggles that would never be taught in classrooms. The war, he understood, was as much about the unseen and untold as it was about the battles everyone knew. And in the quiet of that night, with snow falling softly over a land scarred by conflict, Stern made a silent vow: no matter the danger, no matter the cost, he would ensure that these hidden truths survived. For the world needed to know. The dawn broke like a cold blade over the snow-covered plains, and Captain Elias Stern felt the weight of the night's discoveries pressing against his chest. The photographs of the experimental crates, the documents detailing human suffering, and the meticulously mapped supply lines were now in his possession, but the knowledge carried a darker, unspoken threat. The war was not only fought with bullets, bombs, and fire, it was fought with lies, deceit, and betrayal so subtle that even the most vigilant could be ensnared. As Stern and Lucian returned to the bunker, a sense of unease crept in. Every shadow seemed a potential observer, every sound a warning. But what unsettled him most was the creeping realization that the third shocking fact of World War II, one that history would never openly acknowledge, was that betrayal often came from the most trusted allies. Intelligence networks had been infiltrated at every level. Those who swore loyalty could turn in an instant. Friends became enemies overnight, not for ideology, but for survival, fear, or self-interest. Inside the bunker, Dr. Katerina Weiss and Sergeant Tomasz Nowak were reviewing the photographs Stern had taken. The candlelight danced across their serious faces, accentuating the lines of exhaustion etched into their features. "We're seeing patterns," Katerina said softly, her voice trembling slightly. The Nazis knew exactly where to deploy experimental munitions and when. This means someone inside the intelligence network is feeding them information. Someone close to us. Stern's stomach turned. The implication was simple but horrifying: their every move could be compromised. Their safe houses, their courier routes, even their rendezvous points could be known to the enemy. Lucian clenched his jaw. "So we're being hunted, by ghosts we can't see," he muttered, voice taut with frustration. The tension was palpable as they devised a plan to track the leak. The fourth shocking truth, the layer of espionage and double-crossing that lurked behind Allied operations, was unfolding in real time. Each decision had to be deliberate, every movement calculated, and trust rationed like food in a siege. Stern and his team had to act as though every ally might be an adversary, a reality that gnawed at their nerves with merciless persistence. Later that day, a courier arrived with a coded message supposedly from London Command. Stern and Katerina decoded it with careful precision, and the words made them freeze. The message contained instructions that, if followed, would have sent their team into a trap. It was a subtle trap, disguised as an operational directive, but it was deadly enough to wipe out the entire unit. Lucien's eyes darkened. "Someone wants us dead," he said quietly, almost to himself. "And they've been inside the network all along." The team decided to act cautiously, altering their plans and using decoy movements to confuse any potential spies. As night fell, they moved toward a rendezvous point near the Oder River, a location where Stern had previously mapped safe passage for a covert shipment of intelligence. Each step through the frozen landscape was heavy with tension, every rustle in the underbrush a potential herald of death. Halfway through the night, Stern caught sight of a figure in the distance. A German patrol? Perhaps. Or maybe the traitor. He motioned to Lucien, and they silently took cover behind a mound of snow. Through the telescope, Stern recognized the silhouette, a man they had worked with in the intelligence network, someone who had smiled during briefings, laughed during moments of shared respite, someone they had trusted. The betrayal was clear, yet the identity remained ambiguous. The man moved with precision, following instructions as if rehearsed. Stern realized that history would never tell of these betrayals, these quiet, invisible manipulations that dictated lives as much as any battlefield engagement. The war, he understood, was as much about betrayal as it was about strategy. They decided to intercept the shipment, but with careful precautions. Tomasz rigged a decoy route to mislead observers, while Katerina sent a series of false signals to ensure the traitor could not anticipate their next moves. The tension was almost unbearable as the team worked in silence, coordinating actions with the precision of a surgical strike. The night air was bitter, and every breath seemed to crystallize in the cold. Stern's mind raced, imagining what would happen if they failed, the experimental munitions in enemy hands, the loss of countless lives, the reputations of countless unsung heroes erased from history. Yet failure was not an option. They had survived the shadows of Warsaw, infiltrated enemy supply lines, and uncovered atrocities that the world might never acknowledge. To fail now would render all those sacrifices meaningless. As they reached the rendezvous point, Stern and Lucien encountered the shipment under a pale moon. Tomasz moved swiftly, setting charges that would allow them to disable the cargo without detonating the dangerous compounds inside. Katerina coordinated communications, ensuring that any false signals would confuse watchers. But just as the operation reached its peak, a gunshot cracked through the night. Stern dove behind a frozen embankment, heart hammering. Lucien returned fire, shadows flitting through the snow. It was brief, chaotic, terrifying, but the team succeeded in securing the intelligence and rerouting the shipment to safety. Yet the cost was clear, the betrayal was real, and it was still out there. By dawn, as the first light shimmered over the snow-dusted trees, Stern reflected on what they had learned. The third shocking fact had been confirmed: the war's deadliest threats were not always in enemy uniforms. Some walked among them, smiling, whispering, and manipulating events with quiet precision. History would never record the invisible battles waged within their own ranks, yet these hidden wars determined the fates of thousands. And so, as they moved to the next stage of their mission, the weight of betrayal remained, heavy and invisible, a shadow they would carry into the next shocking revelations awaiting them. The night air was thick with frost, the stars hidden behind heavy clouds, as Captain Elias Stern led his team through a labyrinth of frozen fields and shattered forests. Every step was a gamble. The fourth shocking fact of World War II, Stern knew, was that not all peril came from visible enemies. Sometimes the greatest danger was the fragile balance of chance, timing, and trust. One miscalculation could erase months of painstaking work, and perhaps, lives. They were headed toward the final waypoint before delivering critical intelligence to the Allied command. The documents Stern carried revealed atrocities, secret weapons, and betrayals that could change the course of the war. But the closer they moved to the rendezvous, the more palpable the tension became. The wind howled, carrying distant echoes of artillery, as if the landscape itself were warning them that the next steps would demand everything. Lucien's hands were numb, his breath shallow. "It feels like the earth itself is holding its breath," he muttered. Stern offered a brief nod, understanding more than words could convey. Fear was no longer an option, they had moved beyond it into a realm of sharp focus and instinctive action. By late evening, the team reached a concealed clearing where Allied liaison agents awaited them. The plan was simple: exchange the documents, then disappear before the Nazis could realize what had been taken. But simplicity, Stern knew, was often a trap. The fifth shocking truth of the war, the ruthless exploitation of human error, was about to reveal itself in a way none of them could have predicted. As they approached the rendezvous, shadows shifted unnaturally. Stern's instincts screamed. Hidden among the trees were German patrols, their movements precise, deliberate. Someone had betrayed their position, just as Katerina had feared in Part 3. Tomasz froze. "They're waiting for us," he whispered. Stern's jaw tightened. The patrols were too numerous for a frontal assault, and retreat could compromise the intelligence. Every second mattered. Stern made a split-second decision. "We create a diversion. Katerina, Lucien, with me. Tomasz, set the charges for the extraction point. Move fast, silent, precise." They slipped into position, hearts pounding like war. "Drums." Stern signaled, and Tomasz ignited a controlled explosion several hundred meters away, a thunderous crack that echoed through the trees and drew enemy eyes and weapons toward it. The team sprinted silently to the rendezvous point, cloaked by darkness and chaos. As they exchanged the intelligence with the Allied agents, Stern noticed a small movement out of the corner of his eye. A young soldier, barely more than a boy, had frozen, staring at them. Stern understood instantly: the war had countless unwilling participants, children forced into the machinery of death. He ducked instinctively, pulling Lucien and Katerina behind a tree as bullets ricocheted off frozen ground. The firefight lasted only moments, but in that brief interval, the horror and heroism of the war became unmistakably clear. Each movement, each breath, carried the weight of unseen sacrifices. And here, in this frozen clearing, Stern realized the sixth shocking fact of World War II: ordinary people, thrust into extraordinary circumstances, often displayed acts of courage that would never be recorded in history books. By the time the skirmish ended, the patrol had moved on, likely reporting nothing more than a brief echo of activity. Stern's team exhaled collectively, tension slowly giving way to the icy realization of what they had survived. Katerina's voice was quiet, almost reverent. "Every life here matters," she said. "And yet, how many of them will anyone ever remember?" Stern nodded, brushing snow from his coat. He knew history favored generals, politicians, and battlefield victories. It rarely remembered those who labored in the shadows, who risked everything without recognition. Yet every heartbeat, every risk, had the potential to save thousands. He glanced at Lucien. "By the way," he said casually, masking the gravity of the moment, "if you're clinging to this moment with me, make sure to hit subscribe, more waits just ahead, and you won't want to miss the revelations coming next." The comment was oddly fitting, a reminder that even amidst chaos, storytelling, like survival, needed witnesses. The night wore on as they moved silently toward a secondary extraction point, where a network of safe houses and sympathetic villagers would provide shelter. The terrain was treacherous, a frozen wasteland filled with hidden ditches, ice patches, and the occasional abandoned vehicle. Stern's mind raced, not just with tactical calculations, but with the human stories unfolding in every shadow. Families hidden in attics, children whispering prayers in bombed-out churches, mothers carrying supplies to resistance fighters. Each of them, he realized, was a living testament to the war's hidden truths. It was in one such village, crumbling and desolate, that Stern and Lucien discovered a hidden archive. Stacks of documents detailed secret negotiations between Axis powers and neutral governments, agreements that had never been disclosed, hidden treaties, and forbidden operations. The documents revealed that entire regions were considered expendable, populations sacrificed to strategic calculations. This, Stern realized, was the seventh shocking fact, the world had been manipulated at the highest levels, with human lives treated as chess pieces in a game of global domination. They cataloged the evidence meticulously. Stern knew that when the war ended, this material could rewrite histories, exposing truths that governments preferred to bury. Yet survival remained paramount. Possession of these documents made them immediate targets. The team moved cautiously, understanding that revelation and preservation of truth carried risks equal to the bullets and bombs surrounding them. As dawn broke over the frozen village, the team paused briefly. Snow fell silently, covering destruction in a deceptive blanket of peace. Stern looked at his companions, Lucien, Katerina, Tomasz, and felt the invisible weight of history pressing down on them. They were witnesses, carriers of truths that the world was not ready to hear. The forest stretched before them, vast and merciless, but so did the potential impact of their mission. Each step was heavy with responsibility, each breath a reminder that their actions, unseen and unsung, were shaping history in ways no classroom, no textbook, no monument could ever capture. And so, at the edge of oblivion, Stern understood something fundamental: the war's real battles were fought in shadowed forests, in secret negotiations, and in hearts willing to risk everything. Heroism, betrayal, human suffering, and moral courage intertwined in ways that would remain hidden from history, except to those willing to uncover it. The horizon was a cold gray as Captain Elias Stern led his team toward the industrial district where the Nazis had stockpiled experimental weapons. The wind cut through the frozen air, carrying the scent of burning wood and the faint, acrid tang of smoke from distant bombings. Each step forward was a negotiation with death. Stern's instincts screamed that every movement could trigger disaster, and yet retreat was no longer an option. The fifth shocking fact of World War II revealed itself in the machinery of resistance. Ordinary citizens, unarmed and untrained, often performed acts of courage that rivaled the valor of any soldier. Underground networks of civilians, engineers, and sympathizers had risked everything to relay messages, sabotage supply lines, and protect fugitives. Stern knew that their mission depended as much on these invisible allies as on their own skill with weapons and intelligence. Without the network's support, their endeavor would fail before it began. As they approached the facility, Tomasz and Lucien moved ahead to scout, slipping through shadows with the fluidity of ghosts. Stern followed, documenting the perimeter with binoculars. The compound was heavily guarded, barbed wire glinting under the pale dawn light, watchtowers manned by vigilant soldiers, and patrols circling in predictable patterns. "Timing is everything," Tomasz whispered, crouching behind a snow-covered crate. "We strike during the shift change. Less risk, maximum confusion." Stern nodded, sweat mingling with the cold as he adjusted his gloves. The plan required perfect synchronization. A single misstep would result in the annihilation of the entire team, and the intelligence they carried would be lost forever. Inside the facility, Stern's team discovered evidence of horrific experimentation, chemical compounds being tested on animals and humans alike, weapon prototypes designed for mass destruction, and documents detailing potential strategies to decimate civilian populations. It was almost too much to process. Stern clenched his fists, anger and horror warring with the necessity of remaining calm. The sixth shocking fact: most atrocities were meticulously documented by the perpetrators themselves, yet history would hide these records from the world, was laid bare in these files. They split into two groups. Stern and Katerina moved to extract documents, while Lucien and Tomasz planted charges to disable the weapons. The facility's silence was broken only by the quiet hiss of ventilation and the occasional clatter of machinery. Every step was deliberate, every shadow could conceal a soldier ready to pull the trigger. Suddenly, a spotlight cut across the floor, forcing the team into immediate cover. Stern's heart raced. Lucien hissed, signaling them toward a shadowed corridor. The patrol was alert, too early for the planned shift change. Someone had tipped the Nazis off. Stern realized the terrifying truth: their operations were being tracked not just by traitors, but by technology and surveillance far more sophisticated than anyone had imagined. They moved with precision, Tomasz's charges now ready to detonate, Katerina carrying the key documents. The team's survival depended on split-second timing and nerves of steel. Each heartbeat felt amplified in the tension-filled silence of the factory. And then, an explosion erupted in a distant wing. Tomasz had ignited a diversion, causing a secondary collapse that drew the guards away. The team seized the moment, sprinting through hallways lined with chemical barrels and experimental machinery, their movements precise and coordinated. Stern felt a surge of adrenaline. The facility's dark secrets were within reach of the world, ready to be exposed. As they reached the extraction point, the weight of the past weeks pressed on them. Stern glanced at his companions, all exhausted but unbroken. Katerina's hands trembled slightly as she secured the documents, and Lucian's face was smeared with soot, eyes gleaming with resolve. Tomasz, ever the stoic, allowed himself a brief smile as he surveyed the demolition charges ready to disable the remaining weapons. The final shocking fact of World War II revealed itself in that moment. The culmination of courage, intellect, and determination, often unseen, could tip the balance of history. Victory was not solely the product of armies or generals, it was the result of small teams, working in shadows, taking risks that no one would ever acknowledge publicly. Stern initiated the final phase, synchronized detonations to destroy the facility. Flames erupted, consuming weapons, documents, and infrastructure. The heat was intense, even in the frigid air, and the roar of destruction echoed across the industrial district. Stern's team sprinted for cover, the acrid smoke filling their lungs as alarms blared in the distance. Once at a safe distance, they watched as the facility became a furnace of ruin. Stern allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. They had succeeded, not without risk, not without close calls, and not without witnessing horrors that would haunt them forever, but they had prevented these weapons and documents from falling into the wrong hands. Yet victory was bittersweet. The war continued, countless lives were still at stake, and the network of betrayal and secrecy they had uncovered was far from dismantled. The true cost of heroism, Stern realized, was often invisible: sleepless nights, the weight of moral responsibility, and memories that could never be shared publicly. As dawn broke over the burning facility, the team understood that history would remember generals and grand battles, but not the men and women who risked everything in silence. Their mission had saved thousands, uncovered atrocities, and revealed truths the world would struggle to accept. Stern's heart swelled with a quiet, resolute pride. They had acted when the shadows of the world demanded action, and in doing so, they had rewritten fragments of history, one secret at a time. The morning after the facility's destruction, the air was thick with the scent of smoke, burnt chemicals, and cold frost. Captain Elias Stern and his team moved cautiously through the aftermath, each step a reminder of how close they had come to disaster. The once imposing industrial compound was now a smoldering ruin, a testament to human ingenuity, courage, and the terrifying potential for destruction. Despite their success, the shadows of war were relentless. The seventh shocking fact of World War II revealed itself now: even when heroic deeds succeeded, the cost, psychological, moral, and emotional, was immense, often invisible to those who recorded history. Stern could feel it in the tremor of Lucian's hands, the tight jaw of Tomasz, and the distant, haunted look in Katerina's eyes. As they navigated the snow-laden fields back to the network of safe houses, Stern reflected on everything they had uncovered. The documents cataloged atrocities, human experimentation, and covert operations that no classroom would ever acknowledge. The human cost of these discoveries weighed heavily. Stern had seen men and women, prisoners and innocents, subjected to horrors beyond imagination, all for the sake of strategy, ambition, or ideology. The journey back was perilous. German patrols, alerted by the explosions and chaos, scoured the countryside. The team relied on coded signals, hidden pathways, and the support of villagers who risked their lives for the resistance. Along the way, they encountered the victims of the war's hidden machinery: families displaced, starving children, and soldiers too weary to fight further. Each encounter reinforced the bitter truth: victory was never absolute, and the collateral damage often overshadowed the glory of triumph. Stern found himself reflecting on the moral complexity of their actions. The sabotage had saved thousands, possibly tens of thousands, from experimental weapons and chemical attacks. Yet, in destroying the facility, they had also condemned others, guards who had no choice but to follow orders, laborers coerced into maintaining the compound, and civilians inadvertently caught in the crossfire. This was the harsh reality of heroism. No victory came without compromise, and no action was purely just. As they reached a temporary safe house in a snowbound village, the team took a moment to breathe. Stern noticed a small child peeking from behind a crumbling wall, clutching a doll with a cracked face. The image was hauntingly familiar. In the shadows of war, innocence was a fragile thing, surviving only through the courage of those willing to act in secrecy. Katerina studied the documents they had retrieved, ensuring nothing was lost. "These truths, they'll shock the world when they emerge," she whispered. "But history has a way of burying inconvenient facts." Stern nodded. He understood. While the destruction of the facility and the collection of evidence were monumental, the broader story of courage, betrayal, and moral ambiguity would likely never be fully acknowledged. They had altered the course of events, yes, but the world might never know the full extent of their deeds. Yet there was no time for despair. Reports had reached them that the Nazis were mobilizing in response, hunting the network that had orchestrated the sabotage. Every village, every road, could conceal a threat. The team pressed onward, determined to deliver the documents to the Allied command, knowing that the secrets contained within could finally expose atrocities and prevent further devastation. Along the journey, Stern reflected on the fourth, fifth, and sixth shocking facts: the pervasive betrayal within intelligence networks, the heroism of ordinary civilians, and the meticulous recording of atrocities that would never see the light of day. Now, more than ever, he felt the burden of responsibility to ensure these truths survived, even if recognition never came. By evening, they reached a discreet drop point near the Allied command post. The handoff was swift but tense. Officers accepted the documents with solemn nods, clearly aware of the gravity of the intelligence. Stern's team had achieved what few could have imagined: preventing potential mass destruction, uncovering human experimentation, and surviving near impossible odds. As they prepared to leave, Stern allowed himself a quiet moment of reflection. Every battle they had fought, every secret uncovered, every close call had led to this point. They had glimpsed the hidden layers of war, betrayal, courage, human suffering, and the moral ambiguities that textbooks never touched. These were the truths that would haunt the soldiers, the spies, and the civilians for the rest of their lives. The team moved silently through the snow-covered streets, shadows among shadows, knowing that their work was not yet complete. The war still raged, the enemy still existed, and the final confrontations were yet to come. But they had left an indelible mark, a series of actions that would ripple through history, affecting outcomes in ways the world would never fully acknowledge. As night fell, Stern gazed at the stars above, unbroken despite the clouds. Somewhere, hidden behind the smoke and the silence, the world's future was being shaped by courage and sacrifice that would never be recorded. The seventh shocking fact loomed largest of all: true heroism often existed in obscurity, in deeds unseen, in lives quietly risked to uphold justice and humanity. And in that quiet, cold night, Stern understood that history was not simply the story of victories and defeats, it was also the story of those who dared to act when no one else would, who risked everything for truths that might never be told, and who bore the ghosts of the fallen in silence, forever haunted by the shadows of a war that consumed more than just battlefields. The morning sun rose weakly over the frost-bitten landscape, painting everything in muted shades of gray. Captain Elias Stern and his team had survived impossible odds, uncovered atrocities that history would never formally acknowledge, and delivered intelligence that might save countless lives. Yet as they moved toward the Allied command post for debriefing, Stern felt an unfamiliar weight pressing on his chest, the profound awareness that history's pages rarely contain the full truth of what they had endured. The final shocking truth, the seventh and perhaps most profound, revealed itself not in action, but in reflection. History is written by those who survive, but the lives of those who act heroically in the shadows often vanish from memory. Stern realized that their victories, while critical, would likely remain unrecorded, their sacrifices invisible except to the few who had witnessed them firsthand. The team entered the Allied command quietly. Officers greeted them with a mixture of relief and solemn recognition, understanding the gravity of the intelligence they now carried. Maps, photographs, and documents were reviewed meticulously, and for the first time, Stern allowed himself to relax, just enough to let the adrenaline ebb. Lucien leaned against a wall, exhaling sharply. "We made it," he said, voice heavy with exhaustion. "But at what cost?" Stern nodded. He knew the question was not rhetorical. The cost had been etched in every scar, every sleepless night, every terrified heartbeat. It was the faces of children glimpsed in villages, the anguished cries of prisoners in hidden camps, the betrayal of those they had trusted, all of it carried into the icy forests, the shadowed alleys, and the secret bunkers where the war was fought quietly, unseen by history. Katerina placed the final documents in the secure archive. Her hands trembled slightly, the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. "If these reach the right hands," she whispered, "perhaps some of what we've seen will be acknowledged." Stern's gaze drifted outside, across the frost-glazed landscape. The war continued, battles raged, cities burned, lives were still being sacrificed. Yet in the small victories of intelligence delivered, facilities sabotaged, and lives spared, there was a sense of moral accomplishment that no medal could represent. They had acted where others could not, exposed truths that others ignored, and preserved humanity in moments of overwhelming darkness. He reflected on the 7 shocking facts they had uncovered together. Heroes are forged in shadows, where their courage goes unnoticed by history. Secret weapons and atrocities existed beyond textbooks, threatening civilizations in ways the world would never officially acknowledge. Betrayal often came from trusted allies, revealing that the deadliest enemies could be invisible. The war's subtle manipulations were as deadly as any battlefield, targeting minds and morale. Ordinary civilians performed extraordinary acts of heroism, shaping outcomes in ways no official record would document. Atrocities were meticulously recorded by perpetrators, yet history would hide these details for decades. True heroism often remains invisible, remembered only by those willing to bear witness. Each fact weighed on Stern's conscience, a tapestry of courage, horror, and moral complexity that textbooks would never reproduce. Yet in the quiet, snow-covered morning, he felt an immense pride. They had acted when no one else could, and in doing so, had altered the trajectory of countless lives. The team was summoned for debriefing, and as Stern recounted their mission, he noticed subtle nods of understanding from commanding officers. While the world might never know their names, the impact of their actions would ripple across the continent, shaping outcomes in ways invisible to the public eye. Stern smiled faintly at the realization. Perhaps anonymity was the ultimate testament to true heroism. Later, as the team prepared to depart, Stern lingered for a moment outside the Allied post. Snowflakes drifted gently around him, settling on his coat and the documents he had carried across forests, villages, and battlefields. Somewhere, a distant artillery shell detonated, a reminder that the war was far from over, but the knowledge they had preserved offered a glimmer of hope. He thought of the prisoners in the frozen facility, the children scavenging in Warsaw, the civilians who had risked their lives to aid the resistance. Each of them represented a fragment of the hidden history Stern had now witnessed. And though the world might never acknowledge it, the truth would endure because they had dared to act. Stern turned to his companions, Lucien, Katerina, and Tomasz, and saw exhaustion mingled with quiet satisfaction. They were a team forged in secrecy, bonded by shared danger, and strengthened by the knowledge that their deeds, though unseen, carried immeasurable significance. The final leg of their journey took them through the remnants of bombed-out villages, over frozen rivers, and beneath shattered bridges. The landscape bore silent witness to the war's cruelty and resilience alike. Stern understood that this journey, and the 7 shocking facts they had uncovered, were not just historical revelations. They were a testament to the enduring capacity for courage, ingenuity, and moral resolve even in humanity's darkest hours. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the frost-laden fields, Stern allowed himself one final thought. History would remember the wars, the generals, and the battles, but it was the invisible actions, the quiet heroism, and the secrets unearthed in shadows that truly shaped the world. And he, along with those who had stood by him, had ensured that these truths would survive, carried forward by those brave enough to witness them. In the silence that followed, a fragile peace settled over the land, fragile yet unbroken. Stern smiled faintly, a mix of relief, grief, and resolve. The shadows of history were vast, but they had carved out a place for truth, courage, and justice, one unseen act at a time. And so, the war raged on, but in the hearts of a few, the hidden battles were won, the 7 shocking facts were preserved, and the echoes of unseen heroism whispered across the frozen landscapes of Europe, unrecorded, yet immortal in their impact.